I will be reading this in character as Mrs. Charles Spurgeon. When you get to the end of this video, you'll see why. Imagine that you are at the judgment seat of Christ, and Christ stands before you, and something you said has made him very angry. You shudder, wondering what it is that you said that made him so angry. Meeting with Jesus this year on Skype through Brent Spiner has mostly been a very positive experience, but sometimes it's been like I've been at the judgment seat of Christ because I am speaking with the real Jesus, and he's able to let me know how my service has been for him. So it's kind of like being at the judgment seat of Christ in advance. Yet I know that God is all-loving and all-forgiving, and he would not bother to meet with me if I could not make it right. So I don't panic when he corrects me. I say, Jesus, why do you meet with me and correct me about these things? It's because you're my favorite, Gail. It hurts so much when you make mistakes, and I want to be able to use you and not put you on the shelf, so I have to correct you. Why am I your favorite? It would take eons to explain, Gail. Yes, Jesus tells me that I'm his favorite, and sometimes to correct me he has to show tough love. He knows that I don't like to anger him, because I love him, so when he meets with me he always praises me as well as corrects me. It's great to talk to Jesus, because my life has been so overwhelming with all sorts of problems, many of which only God himself could fix. So Brent Spiner, Terence Jenkins, and I are honored to have him meet with us when he does, because he always helps us. But I was shocked when Jesus told me in October 2012 that I worshipped the King James Bible and that he considered that idol worship. I never ever thought that I would be judged for idol worship because I worship the King James Bible. When Jesus was through teaching and correcting me on this matter, he reassured me that he knew that I served him because I loved him. And he said, yes, Gail, you serve me because you love me, and you will be casting those crowns at my feet. On my own, I have explored Bible teachers who will help me to reorient to a more correct doctrinal position in all areas. I bought Oswald Chambers' My Utmost for His Highest and began reading it again. I had abandoned it in my late 20s after I became a King James only person because he used the revised version. But Jesus has told me that Oswald Chambers is a cool guy, and he thinks My Utmost for His Highest is great. My new view is that the King James is a good translation, but not the only good translation, like I used to believe. I used to think that all other Bibles not from the Textus Receptus, like the King James, came from corrupt Roman Catholic manuscripts. Before, I would read the Bible, and it became mechanical to me because I had read it cover to cover over 100 times, and it was like, what is new? So to make my Bible study more exciting, I got really into the numbering of the verses and of the books in the King James Bible and tried to make major Bible doctrines out of these, which, by the way, Jesus has informed me I've carried a little bit too far. Studying the King James passages alongside the New Living and other translations has made my Bible study come alive. It's almost as if I'm reading some of these passages for the first time now. Jesus corrected a lot of my doctrines that were incorrect over the past year because they were based solely on the English in the King James, which has some archaic wording that makes it easy to misunderstand what God is trying to say. So now I am rereading the entire Bible alongside other reliable English translations like the New International Version, the New American Standard Bible, and the New Living Bible, so that I can get a balanced picture of what God is trying to say in each verse as I read. As I've done this, I've searched through YouTube and the internet, and sometimes my search engine will accidentally land on something of spiritual significance. I landed on a YouTube movie about the life of Charles Spurgeon and decided to listen to it. As I watched this movie, I could tell this was no accident because the life of Charles Spurgeon seemed to match My experiences and Brent Spiner's exactly. By the end of the movie, I was in tears. And then when it stated that Charles Spurgeon died at the age of 57, I about dropped out of my chair. I was born in 1957, and watching this movie was like watching a movie about Brent Spiner and myself in so many ways. Spurgeon was born on June 19th, 1834, and I was 34 years old, and it was in June when Brent Spiner called me on the phone and made love to me for the first time. And the year that this happened was 1991 and 1992, and Spurgeon died on January 31st, 1892. They say when he died that the angels in the sky welcomed him to heaven. January 1992 is when I started writing with my heart full of love for Brent Spiner. And Jesus says that my novel, Silver Skies, is a prophecy. After I finished my Bible study on this subject and did a registry cleaning on my computer, it found 57 errors to correct. I'm not sure what to make of that. The Philadelphia church period in history, if you'll look at Revelation 3, is the greatest period in all the history of the Christian church. It was during this time that we had the great missionary movements with David Livingstone, Hudson Taylor, Adoniram Judson, and the great evangelists and spiritual revivals on a massive scale, so that even the governments of the world were affected. Evangelists like George Whitefield, Jonathan Edwards, Charles Spurgeon, D.L. Moody, and many other Christian greats. The 20th century, for the most part, has produced anemic Christians compared to what came out in the 17th to 19th centuries and the early 20th century, which was the Philadelphia church period in history. There have been greats in this time, in the 20th as well, but not as many as came out in the Philadelphia church period. As I watched this movie about Charles Spurgeon in utter amazement, because of the uncanny similarities between Mr. Spurgeon and myself, the Holy Spirit seemed to say to me, Gail, your Church of Gail is the Philadelphia church resurrected. It is the fulfillment of the promise that I made to the Philadelphia church that I would keep this church from the hour of temptation that would come upon all the world. And I was amazed at what I found in Revelation chapter 3, and so blessed. I do believe that our Church of Gail is the Philadelphia church resurrected, so that God could fulfill the promise he made to the Philadelphia church in Revelation 3:10, that he would keep this church from the hour of temptation that would come upon all the world. What a promise! The Philadelphia church is the only church that God does not criticize in Revelation 2 and 3, and I believe that God has brought back Charles Spurgeon in people like myself and Brent Spiner, the leaders at Church of Gail, or the leaders of the Philadelphia church. The Holy Spirit has guided me as I've studied the Bible, and it seems to tell me that the reason our Church of Gail is so special is because we are the Philadelphia church. When I was a King James only person, I thought that the reason so many Christian greats existed during the Philadelphia church period was because this was the only period in church history that kept his word in the form of the King James Bible. But the Holy Spirit seems to correct me, and it seems to say, no, Gail, the Philadelphia church period was great because, for the most part, the greats during that period were absolutely surrendered to me. It's ironic that now the ones who harm me the most are the King James only people, and they have the same sin the Jesuits had, the sin of idolatry. Perhaps the idol is different, but it seems the fruits of idolatry are the same. It produces a cult mentality, where you can't reason with the person about their idol. They just disdain you if you do so. They harm God's true servants and think they are doing God's service. They've been putting bugs in my computer, polluting my air with pollen, harassing me when I go outside to shop and drive, and have posted stolen private nudes of me online, They are just as bad as the Jesuits used to be, with the same spirit that the Jesuits used to have. I invite you to listen to the Charles Spurgeon movie that I've watched over and over because it is such a blessing to me. And go to my website, gabrielchana.com, and click on the link about the Philadelphia Church at my opening web page. It's amazing how God has showed me that our Church of Gail is the resurrected Philadelphia Church. This truly seems to be divine providence.